Hi, my name is Gina Drop, and I am the Associate Artistic Director of Four Walls Theater. I'm here with Pravin Wilkins today, and I am going to have the great joy of interviewing him and getting to pick his brain a little bit as a playwright. If you've been following the Four Walls journey, you know that our upcoming production, Bars, is written by Pravin, and we're going to get into a little bit of what inspires Pravin to write and what Bars is all about. If this is your first interview that you've watched with Four Walls, then I want to talk a little bit about what Four Walls is. We are a grassroots theater company founded by Alana Gartner in the midst of the COVID pandemic. We wanted to find a place where theater artists could come together and work, explore their art, and explore social issues that we are facing right now and have been for a long time. If you want to find out more about our mission and our past work, you can go to fourwallstheater.com, and you can find us on social media, including Facebook at Four Walls Theater, on Instagram at Four Walls Theater, on Twitter at Four Theater, and you can always tune into our previous videos linked here on our YouTube channel. One of the cornerstones of the Four Wall mission is to link charities in need with a production. Our spotlighted charity for Bars is The Keepers. You can learn more about The Keepers at followthekeepers.org, and Pravin is going to talk more about that choice to pair The Keepers with our production of Bars. I'm going to introduce Pravin now. He has an outstanding history of a young playwright. He is a playwright, a poet, and a fiction writer from San Diego, California, whose work typically deals with race and class struggle and the many intersections between. Pravin began writing plays during his time as an undergraduate student of literature and political science at the University of California, San Diego. There, he received the Eric Bowling Award from the UCSD Department of Theater and Dance for his one-act play, #Take Back Graffiti Hall. His experience with staging this work inspired him to pursue a graduate degree in dramatic writing at Carnegie Mellon University. During his time at CMU, he wrote his first full-length play, Moreno, which was recognized as a 2020 O'Neill National Playwrights Conference finalist. And he wrote Bars, which was featured in CMU's New Work series. In May 2020, Pravin received his MFA, congratulations, Pravin, in dramatic writing from Carnegie Mellon University School of Drama. Currently, he is a writer in residence at City Books in Pittsburgh, and he is continuing his work as a writer and an activist. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Pravin, and for letting me pick your brain and get to ask you all of these questions.
Of course, Gina, thank you so much for setting this up.
Of course. So I'm going to jump right into the questions if you're ready. And I also forgot, I'm going to make a note really quick for the audience members. After I'm done talking with Pravin here with our questions, we're going to open questions up to the audience. So if you think of anything and what we're talking about now that you want to find out more, save those questions to the end and we will take them. Thank you. Are you ready, Pravin, for me?
All ready.
Great. So I'm really curious as to what personally inspires you to start writing a play, because you're a playwright and you're also a fiction writer and you're a poet. How do you know if a story is specifically meant to be a play, and what inspired you to start playwriting in college? What sparked that desire?
Great. So I'll start with the when I know something is a play question. I think one of the main things for me is I want to represent like multiple viewpoints. Like when there are clashing ideas in my head or I'm conflicted about how to approach a problem, that's a moment where I'm like, okay, maybe there's a play here because there could be one person who thinks a certain way about this thing and another person who thinks a different way. And so I think really at the heart of, to me, what is a play is knowing that there will be different people fighting for different things, believing in different things, and putting themselves out there. Whereas I think for me, poetry is more of a home for less filtered thoughts and feelings about things that I don't necessarily want to put in a big story yet. Maybe sometimes when my poems find their ways into my plays, but often those are for more like for little things like feelings or thoughts, whereas plays, I really want to get into a bigger conversation, tap into a conflict, things like that. The way that I first got into playwriting was when I was at UCSD, which has a really phenomenal theater program and brings in some amazing artists, specifically within playwriting, where I took a playwriting class with Anna Munch, who is a very, very successful and amazing playwright and TV writer. And it was really in that class where I first was introduced to theater as a form, to actually create. I don't know, I didn't have a theater program in my high school. And so I grew up thinking of theater as just like Shakespeare, like that. I didn't have a deep understanding of the fact that there is so much amazing contemporary theater that is being made, produced right now and over the course of my whole life. Right. And that was kind of something that I learned a little bit about in college was actually studying contemporary plays, reading pieces like Viet Gone, or A Raisin in the Sun, I would consider still relatively modern. And so I was like, wow, I really like this form. I really like dialogue driven storytelling. And I mean, I know now so much theater is happening in a digital space, but in the beginning, to me, something that really drew me to theater was like the fact that we live so much of our lives digitally. It was cool to have a performance live in front of you. And I'm super excited to see how we can bring those elements of live performance to a digital space. I think a lot of interesting things are happening with that nowadays. But yeah, mainly through taking classes at UCSD and then ultimately writing and putting up some plays with my fellow undergraduate students, like Take Back Graffiti Hall. That was really my introduction into theater as an art form to participate in and to create.
Amazing. I love that idea also as someone who is a playwright, that a play is a place where you can battle with ideas. I so often feel like I come into a play with a very strict point that I want to make. But it's a really beautiful idea of thinking about what is an internal struggle that I'm having and how can I flush those out with characters that have differentiating points of view. That's amazing, Pravin.
Yeah, and I think it sometimes like the most interesting thing that can happen as a writer creating a play is when you go in, you think you have a certain point, but you put these ideas into characters who truly believe in them and fight for them, and you realize maybe it's more nuanced than you thought. I think that's something I often find when I write plays.
Nice. My next question is, I want to bring us into this moment where we got to enjoy some conversation with you in our first rehearsal with the cast. So the Four Walls process is a series of online rehearsals that leads up to our online virtual performance. And our first rehearsal traditionally has the playwright. And it lends for such a rich start to the process because the actors get to talk to the playwright. They get to pick their brain on what is important and what needs to be kind of rooted up before the process starts and what to look for as they discover for themselves. And in this first rehearsal, Pravin had made this statement, and I'm going to quote you, Pravin. You said, "Black women have paved the way for anything I have achieved." And you spoke more on that, and I thought that it was so inspiring, such a beautiful sentiment. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this perspective and also how it led you to choose the Keepers as your spotlighted charity for this production.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two levels to this. I think in the broader sense, like everybody in America, especially people of color, we should respect and honor the work of revolutionary Black women who have been at the cutting edge of every single progressive movement towards true justice and righteousness that we've seen in this country, from the days of Harriet Tubman and Harriet Jacobs fighting against the incredibly oppressive system of slavery, to women like Angela Davis and Assata Shakur, who are today fighting against the oppressive system that we know of as criminal justice. And so I think in the broad sense, we all should be very grateful, and we all should honor these Black revolutionary men, and really people, women and people of all genders, who have fought over the years for these elements of progress. But more specifically, as it relates to me personally, so I am multiracial, and the precedent, the legal precedent for multiracial marriage was fought for and achieved by a Black woman, Mildred Loving, and her husband. So the fact that my parents are married, that is something that I personally owe to a Black woman who fought for that, right? The fact that I'm in this country as a first generation Indian immigrant is also due to the work of Black progressives and activists who fought during the civil rights movement, right? Something that I think is very important to remember is the Immigration Act of 1965 was passed by really on the heels of the powerful movement for civil rights that achieved things like the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in the mid 60s, right? So the Immigration Act, one thing that's very important, I think, that I learned during my time studying US history is that South Asians were explicitly discriminated against by the mechanisms of the US law that controlled immigration. So the fact that my mother was able to come to this country, the fact that my parents were able to get married, the fact that I am here now, all rests on the work of Black activists, Black revolutionary women. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we think about anything that I'm able to achieve over the span of my life, right? And so when it comes to this show and the Keepers, I think one element of this play is really celebrating the work of Black lyricists and Black music artists in particular. And so there is this one artist who I've been listening to her music and following her for a very long time, named Akua Naru. And so she, a couple of years ago, as a Nasir Jones Fellow at Harvard, started this project to document the contributions of women to the genre of hip hop over the last 50 years. And so then earlier this summer, I saw that she, among with many other women across the world, it's an international collective, launched this organization called The Keepers, which is really continuing, extending, expanding upon, bringing to fruition this work that she started as a Nasir Jones Fellow at Harvard. So I think not only is she an artist who has some amazing things to say and who should be full-heartedly supported in her own right, but she is spearheading this work to celebrate other artists just like her over the years who maybe have been overlooked sometimes, maybe have not been given their full due other times, but one way or the other, her project with the Keepers, her mission with the Keepers is all about centering women's contributions to hip hop, which I think is extremely important and something that the show is deliberately centering as a topic. So it makes sense to center outside of the show too, because I think that's another thing that I really want to do with my work is I don't want it just to be a place where progressive ideas live. I think it's important that we have tangible, concrete action that goes along with these ideas.
Lovely. And we are very excited to be supporting the Keepers. a portion of every ticket donation that is made on our Eventbrite, which is where you can find a ton more information about bars, and I'll talk about that at the end as well. If every donation in lieu of ticket that's made on the Eventbrite, a portion of that goes directly to the keepers, and that's another way that we are supporting this organization in our spotlighted charity spot. I'm going to move into the next question, and it's taking us back to this moment at the first rehearsal again, where we were able to talk about the work and the play, and they were able to ask you questions. And you had talked about how inspired you were by the Dakota Access Pipeline protests in Standing Rock. And you found yourself in these artistic spaces directly related to political strife. How did these spaces inform or inspire your work? And then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question after that.
Great. Yeah. Well, I think to start, my background in performance is mostly through spoken word poetry, and so when the Dakota Access Pipeline protests began and really became a nationwide protest movement, there were leaders who were organizing in San Diego, which was where I was at the time living. And I attended a few events where essentially there were just like powwows, open mics, where they would have artists come in to deliver poetry, you know, do whatever it is their talent is, as a way of bringing people together to fundraise for the protesters who were at Standing Rock, really at the front lines against the militarized police that were there to essentially to say that this pipeline matters more than the water rights of Native Americans. And so I think being in spaces like that made me realize, like, I don't want to just perform at open mics like on campus at my school in this little bubble of really, to some degree, privilege, and also keeping, like, I never want to keep the real issues at the heart of my work at arm's length from the work. I think that's something I learned from being in those kinds of spaces, was when I would perform my poetry in, you know, a park to people who were all there collectively for a cause that I believed was extremely important. You just get a different feeling than if you're performing your poetry that is all about political struggle and strife to people who are sipping their beers on a Friday night. It just, you know, some work needs to exist in the space that birthed it. And so I think that's one of the major things that I learned, is that I don't really want my work to be a nice night of escapism. I want it to live at the center of the conflict that it is speaking to. That's certainly something that I learned during 2016, during that movement.
So this brings me to kind of something that I think a lot of writers and playwrights and artists are all kind of wondering, and I'd like to see your take on it. How have you stayed inspired, or have you struggled to stay inspired to write during all of this strife that our world has faced this year?
That's a good question. I mean, to some degree, I have been writing less. I've been busy trying to make sure that the fascist in the White House does not occupy that seat much longer, you know, working to get people to sign up to vote in Pennsylvania and get to the polls. I think honestly, writing has taken a back seat right now, but my artistic life has not. And I think in this moment, it's really important to center stories that are making statements about things like police brutality, things like systemic racism. So for example, about a month ago, I did a reading of my play Moreno with Kane Repertory Theater Company. And so I think, and that play is about some fictional football players who are joining Colin Kaepernick's protests in 2016 against systemic racism and police brutality, right? So I think more so, rather than writing in this time, I've been trying to put out my work that centers these issues. Writing has been a little difficult. I mean, I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been doing a lot of, work with Four Walls Theater, for example. Writing has taken a bit of a backseat. It's hard to get in a mental space to really reflect on things when it feels like you're right in the middle of them. So to all of my artists out there and my writers who are feeling like, wow, this is just difficult, and I can't bring myself to write. This is not the end of your creative inspiration. I think a lot of times we need to go through periods of processing before we can get to periods of production. It's like seasons, and we to some degree need to accept what kind of state we're in. And if we can't write, then we can't write one day, and we'll know next week maybe we can.
I'm really happy to hear all of that, and also to know that having bars done with Four Walls is working in with your goals to get work produced. And it also just gave me an idea for myself to go back and look through my work, and maybe other writers can do this as well, and see what political issues have inspired work in the past, and how do I bring those stories more to the forefront? What is changing and what is not, right? So my last big question for you today is a very interesting segue, and it's also a really hard question. And we talked about this a little bit. Bars was written in 2019, and yet it mirrors current events such as the murder of Breonna Taylor so closely that it nearly causes shivers. How has that affected you? And how do you hope audiences, what do you hope they will take from it when they watch Bars?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's always things that I wish in my work would become less relevant with time, that I deep down I know will not. And so I think when it comes to Bars, I was reflecting a lot on the events of 2016, and events that I experienced while I was in college during really the first mass protest movement that led to the formation of Black Lives Matter in the wake of Ferguson, and in the wake of the murders of Michael Brown and Alton Sterling, and Tamir Rice, and too many others. And so I think I was reflecting on these events and the way that the police were deployed against protesters in Standing Rock, and I was reflecting on the connections between these kinds of events. The fact that today we're seeing, prosecutors like Daniel Cameron deliver charades instead of justice is something that I think does not surprise any marginalized person in America. And that's because these things, the legal system has not existed as a justice system ever in American history, ever. And I think over the course of my entire life, the legal system has been used as a bludgeon to keep Black and brown people down, to keep Black and brown people in slavery-like conditions in prisons. And so I think what I want people to really keep in mind today is that whatever American city you are in, there are Black and brown activists who are being charged on trumped up bullshit charges, frankly. And what I want people to understand is that no matter what city you're in America, we should never take prosecutors and police at their word when they tell us that so-and-so activist has done some such terrible thing. We should never take them at their word, because we're conditioned to believe, oh, the attorney generals, the district attorneys of our country are here to protect us and deliver justice. Well, the fact of the matter is that they're actually elected officials who are there with political interests, who prosecute cases politically. And it's not about, they might think it's about justice, these prosecutors like Daniel Cameron, but deep down, I'm sure they understand that every prosecution is a political decision. And so what I want people to keep in mind is that we elect these prosecutors. We should not be supporting any attorney general or district attorney who does not have the support of Black community leaders in any city in America. We should know what these activist leaders are asking for. We should be well versed in what these organizations in whatever city we're in are asking for. We should know which political leaders are actually listening to them. Hint, it's not many, right? And so at the end of the day, I think I want people to walk away and understand that we need serious change right now when it comes to the legal system and the prison system in America.
Definitely. I would like to reiterate that Four Walls Theater definitely encourages everyone to educate yourself and get out there and vote. Look at your voter laws, your early voting polling times and polling places in your areas, and get out there and vote for sure. And now we're going to move to the portion of this interview where we will take interview questions from the audience, and I'm going to be getting them through the chat. So we have one already for you, Pravin, if you're ready. It says, you write 3 characters from 3 very different backgrounds from your own. Did you feel a burden to make that authentic to those experiences? How did you go about creating and getting that authenticity in those characters?
Yeah, well, I think any artist who wants to represent the multicultural space that America is has to take it upon themselves to learn about cultures that you might not be a part of, whether that is expanding what you read, whether that is making sure that you are listening to people of color, whatever room it is that you're in. There are always steps that we can take to make sure that we are hearing the voices of people of color. And I think if we're doing that work, and if we're doing a hell of a lot of listening, then when we approach something like creating a story where we're trying to represent people who are coming from backgrounds that are different than our own, then we are equipped to handle that with more authenticity. And so I think it's really the way to write a play that incorporates people who come from different backgrounds. Really, you have to live your entire life a different way. You have to live your whole life listening to people of color and seeking out sources, whether that's novels like the work of Toni Morrison. I have curated a book list through City Books called Prav's Picks, which incorporates a number of novels, poetry collections, and short stories from people, from Black and brown people, from Indian authors, from Native American authors. And so I think a lot of the work that has to be done when it comes to representing people from different backgrounds actually extends to the way that we live our lives, and has to happen before we even approach writing a piece where we do that.
Definitely. I want to remind, we have another one. If you have any questions about where to vote or to learn more about voting, you can go to www.vote.org. And Pravin, will you just list one more time where we can find that list?
Yeah, so it's city. The place is called City Books, and there will be a link on their page called Prav's Picks. So it's City Books PGH. You can find them on Instagram and Facebook, and then on their website, they have a few digital bookshelves that are curated by myself and the other writers in residence, and my shelf is Prav's Picks. Also, any purchases that you make through the bookshop links on that page will go towards supporting Bucket Bail Fund and supporting incarcerated people in Pittsburgh.
Amazing. I have another question. What are some key takeaways you want the audience to have after you view this production of Bars?
Yeah, well, I think we spoke a little bit to that before. One thing that I just want to re-emphasize is that this is a piece about issues that are playing out right now. And so there are activists across the country who are being given charges for peacefully protesting. There are activists who, while they're trying to work, feed their families, pay rent, and also speak up for issues that need to be addressed in this country, on top of that, are having to deal with court cases that are being thrown at them, right? And that's one way that white supremacy works, is that you tire out anybody who is trying to speak out. And so I think I want people to think of the fact that this is not a play that only exists in the world of theater. The consequences that are explored in this play and the people who pay those consequences are real. Not literally that person, but you get the sense of what I'm saying.
The characters represent groups of oppressed people that exist in our everyday lives, that we interact with every day, that we sometimes see what's happening in the media, but a lot of times these stories are swept under the rug of the injustices that are happening to immigrants, to Black people, to Indigenous people, and people of color in our country. These are real demographics that are represented in three extremely powerful characters in Bars. I will keep taking questions for the next few minutes. I know there's a slight lag from us to YouTube, so I'll fill this little bit of time, but if you guys want to drop some more questions, go ahead. I'm going to just remind everyone or talk a little bit more about the Eventbrite. You can find the Eventbrite from the Facebook event, or you can just get on Eventbrite and look up the Four Walls Theater Presents Bars by Pravin Wilkins and find the option to, one, read every single thing that you need to know about the show. The link to the Eventbrite is underneath this video right now in the comment section, thanks to our producer, Alana. And you can donate in lieu of tickets to help for our donation to the Spotlighted charity and to pay the wonderful actors and artists that are participating in this production, as well as gain access through donation to our talk back on Sunday. The shows for Bars is this coming Saturday and Sunday, October 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, and Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Central. Same place, YouTube Live, this channel. We have another question that says, what came first in your creation of this play? Is this typical of you as a writer?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest questions that I wanted to explore in this play is the concept of dealing with a systemic issue from the inside of that system versus the outside. Because I think having studied political science and, spent a lot of time learning about revolutionary movements around the world and seeing how these movements play out, a big question that I wanted to explore in this piece is, what does it look like when one person believes change can be achieved through a system and one person does not believe that? So I think where a lot of my plays start is with a question like that. But it's kind of a whole lot of things, right? Because I also knew I wanted to write a play that centered spoken word performance. And so sometimes it's like I have like these questions I want to address, and then I have these themes I want to explore, and I have these aesthetics that I want to present. And it's almost like there's a mental list of all of these things. And when everything lines up in a certain way, that's when I know that I have a play.
That's awesome. Let's see. Don't know if we have any more questions coming in. Wait just another. Can you talk about the process of writing this in your MFA program? You just graduated from Carnegie Mellon, and that is where this play was written.
Yeah, definitely. So I was lucky to be able to work with some really great writers and mentors at CMU who had excellent advice for me as I worked through this piece. And so I think one of the major changes that happened as I was writing through this was, originally I wanted the setting to be like in the future and sort of allegorically address the issues that are at the center of this play. But then I was, it became this whole juggling act of trying to create this other world. And I was like, why am I doing all of that when I could just have it be this world right now where we are here, not have to worry about the insane amount of exposition that I was putting on my plate. And then also at the same time, I think it makes more sense to me as an artist to just put front and center the straight up truth of what we're dealing with, instead of do some like Arthur Miller extra layer kind of stuff. It can be elegant. I don't think it's my thing. Maybe when I'm old, or it'll be my thing. I don't know. That's just me right now.
And I know that you, because of the pandemic and graduating in a pandemic, you weren't able to have a production of Bars. So we're so fortunate and excited that you submitted it and that we chose it and that we're going to get to do it in this virtual, wacky, cool way. We have another question. In relation to the upcoming election, did you see a connection between a character like Alex and a real life DA like Kamala Harris?
Yeah, so I think Alex is very much a person who has made sacrifices that other people have paid for. And so when it comes to the political spectrum in America, I think there are a lot of politicians who essentially the barrier to entry is you have to be willing to make some pretty big sacrifices to even be allowed in these rooms, to even so when it comes to like Kamala Harris's history as a DA, right? She was first the DA of San Francisco, where she ran a campaign significantly to the right, significantly more conservative campaign than the person who she was trying to oust, right? And so I think, yeah, Alex definitely does represent a lot of real life district attorneys, and I don't think Alex really is like a Daniel Cameron, right? Like Daniel Cameron is probably about as vicious and anti-justice as you possibly can get. I think with Alex, I wanted to explore a story that was more nuanced, and a story that has a few more layers for us to get into.
Definitely. That we are going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for everyone who has tuned in and offered your questions in the chat and has watched today. And thank you so much to you, Pravin, for your time and enlightening us so much as your journey as a writer and who you are as a writer. I really encourage everyone to come and watch Bars Saturday, October 17th and Sunday, October 18th. Check out more at our Eventbrite. And thank you so much for coming and joining us on the Four Walls Theater YouTube page. I am Gina Drop, and it has been wonderful. Have a great rest of your day.